You've been tasked with building a violence prevention program, and you're wondering where to begin. I want to share all of the details that go into this program for you so you can have an understanding of all of what this process entails and be set up for success. On the other hand, maybe you do know what this program requires, but you're not fully sure if you have everything that you need in place. So holistically, what I want to provide as part of this video is what goes into a full program and why. Why are we doing the things that we're doing within this program a certain way? So let's get started. To begin, I'm going to get into what informs this entire process. Why do we do the things that we do within this process? And so if you bear with me for a moment, I want to go down history lane just a little bit. When we talk about standardization, that has so much to do with the things that go into this program. Before there was laws in place, and over the past several years, how this has become so much of a regulatory environment. Before that, we had to rely on a couple of different documents and standards, if you will, for what does a violence prevention and intervention program require. It's all the way back in 2011 that this actually occurred. This was the watershed moment in this industry. And you had two documents published around the same time, in my opinion, not coincidentally, but one of them was published by federal OSHA. And it was an instruction that basically said, if they're investigating a complaint or if they're investigating an incident, here's all of the things that they're going to be looking for. The other document was published as an American national standard as a partnership between the Society for Human Resources Management, for all of you HR professionals out there, and ASIS International, for all of you security professionals out there. They came together and published an American national standard that outlined all of the things that are required for a comprehensive violence prevention program. Now, these two documents were significant. The OSHA document was significant because this was one of the first areas from a general duty clause standpoint that the federal government was basically saying workplace violence is absolutely part of the general duty clause and absolutely has its applicability as part of holistic upkeep for a safe and secure workplace. It's a foreseeable hazard. It's a foreseeable risk that employers need to contend with. The American National Standard was significant in that the people that published that document, the people that came together to identify what is required in this program, was built on a lot of long-standing precedent and a lot of experience and a lot of piecemeal knowledge that had been put together over the years that finally all came together in this document that for a long time was widely known for coming up in the courts and still is today in many regards. For absent legislation, it was a key benchmark for how these kinds of programs would get tried against when there's civil litigation that would occur. So these two documents were watershed moments. You have it's OSHA instruction, now re-released in 2017. It's OSHA instruction 02-01-058. And the American National Standard is ANSI asis WVPI AA-2020. It was republished in 2020. The one last thing I'll say about the ASIS standard is that when they republished it from 2011 to 2020, one, it had a lot of additional emphasis on active assailant issues. They reduced and pulled out the Americanisms from the original standard, such as OSHA typologies, and they made it globally applicable because ASIS is a globally membered organization and has representation globally, as well as the document did no longer have any representation by SHRM. That was simply because SHRM didn't write standards anymore. They got out of the standards writing business, if you will. I give you all of this information, one, so you can go look at this more if you're building out your own program, but secondly, these are monumental foundational documents for what these documents or what these programs require. And they tend to be the most detailed. Legislation that we're seeing come out and different regulatory guidance, whether it be in the healthcare industry, general industry, such as SB 553, they don't go nearly to the depth of at least what the ASIS standard does. And what we've noticed is that the ASIS standard is still a great resource for how to implement all of these various laws. With that in mind, what then does a program require? What do these documents say? What do even existing laws say that we need to build in? And how do we go about that process? One of the first things that you want to do as an organization is you want to perform an assessment. An assessment is going to do several different things. Help you identify your risk factors, or you want to at least identify what those risk factors are. Are people working alone? Are people working in poorly lit areas? Are people working after hours of darkness? Are you in a high-risk industry, such as healthcare, taxi services, correctional facilities, things like that? What are those risk areas? Then beyond that, what programmatic features does your program currently have? Do you have a policy? Do you have training? Do you have a process to investigate and manage incidents when they are reported or when they occur? Do you have a capability for holistic preparedness of an active assailant? All of these things we want to assess, and in part why I mentioned those standards before is if you're assessing what your program currently has, well, look at these standards for what they say a program needs, and then identify if your program has those capabilities in place. But start off with that assessment. Identify the risks, identify what your program currently has, and then that creates a foundation from which you can launch from throughout the rest of your program. The second thing your program is going to need is prevailing documentation that effectively creates the cornerstone for your violence prevention program. So the standards basically outline that you need a policy, you need a program document, and you need documentation that facilitates active assailant preparedness. It's kind of the core three for an initial program. What does a policy need? Let's start there. A policy is the foundation of your organization's commitment to a safe and secure work environment free from threats and violence. Now, when we build this, there's several different things that we need to have within the policy. That ANSI standard that I mentioned is a great resource for that. We want to have a no threats, no violence approach. If you have zero tolerance, take a look at how zero tolerance can be problematic for this area. We have other videos, check those out about that issue there specifically. We want to address weapons. We want to address domestic and intimate partner violence and its impact on the workplace. Reporting procedures. We want to address confidentiality. We want to address having multiple avenues of reporting. These are all of the kinds of things that you want to have in your policy. It can be lean and mean. It doesn't need to be exhaustive, but those are some of the issues that we need to be addressing within the policy. The program document is the next one. Now here at the center, we call it the governance. California SB 553 law calls it the plan. Other organizations or other places might have this outlined as your program standard or your program standard operation procedure. Terminology can be varying here. That's more of an organizational thing. But here's what this document does. It outlines how the policy will be implemented for the organization and how the program will be managed over the course of time. How do we take that policy and bring it to life? And how are we going to accomplish what the policy is asking of the organization? How are we going to fulfill, in other words, our commitment to a safe work environment? Who's responsible for the program? What is their responsibilities? What roles are within the program? What's HR's role? What is security's role if you have security? Or what is that function's role? What is legal's role? Communications. Maybe if you have a union shop, how are they going to be involved? Or collective bargaining representatives, what is that going to look like? All of these different individuals, we need to have identified what their roles are, their responsibilities. And then we have, in addition to that, the key programmatic features. So What are the training requirements of this program? What are we including in the training? How often are we doing it? How are we communicating this program with employees or our personnel? If an incident occurs, or if we suspect that an incident occurs, what is the process that we will use to investigate it and manage it? What documentation protocols are there? What record-keeping protocols do we need to abide by? How often are we going to review this program? All of this kind of stuff is what goes into this program document and outlines how we're going to basically take this program down the road. Now, here's the benefit of this, or at least one big benefit of this. If you have an individual or a few individuals responsible for this program, then taking this document allows for, if there's turnover or if somebody got hit by a bus for whatever reason, they can continue taking this program down the road and allowing it to be effective for your organization. But that's what that really does. It takes the program from somebody's brain and gets it onto paper so that everybody can have a unified understanding of what's required. The last key document, as I mentioned earlier, is pertinent to active assailant readiness, response, and recovery. So this is a document that is a function of holistic crisis management. And this document effectively outlines what is the organization's expectations for how you're going to be prepared for a potential active assailant incident. It begs the question, what goes into this document? Readiness, response, and recovery. From a readiness standpoint, it's all of the things that we can do to maximize our preparedness for an active assailant. What are the roles and responsibilities we have to do to get there? So what is security doing? HR, what are their responsibilities? Maybe you have business continuity. Maybe you have people in the Global Security Operations Center. Maybe you have specific people for training. Whatever it is, identify those roles that you need for preparedness and then identify how you need to have each function involved to be prepared for this type of event. Other readiness considerations, performing site assessments for potential active assailant concerns. How are we controlling potential individuals that shouldn't be there or deterring them from getting access to certain facilities? But performing those site assessments, perhaps as an organization you do it for other purposes anyway, but tying it into this issue. How are we building partnerships with law enforcement or other emergency management organizations? Training considerations. Who needs to be trained at the individual level, crisis management level, all the way down through the organization, and what does that look like? What are those requirements? Emergency management mass notifications as part of the program. Emergency response kits. What are the requirements for each at every facility and where are they going to be staged? All of these kinds of things are readiness components that we build in to our organization to help be prepared should this thing actually occur. And then the other two big aspects of this is if the event does occur, what's the organizational response protocol? And then what is the individual response protocol as well? And then of course the last piece of this is what does that recovery process look like? After the event concludes, once we identify that the active assailant incident is over with, how do we get the organization and our people back to a place where they feel comfortable going to work again? And sometimes this can take a long time. I remember there was a grocery store that had an active shooter situation several years ago that I was seeing in the news 12, 14 months afterward that they're still working to get the store back up to its typical level of business and operations and people feeling comfortable to come back. So these things have a significant impact on an organization. So all of these things that we can do ahead of time, given the lessons learned from previous incidents, to include benchmarking those standards, help get a strong advancement in our ability to be prepared. Once we get beyond these core documents and the assessment, then all of the practices that these documents outline that we need to do are what need to be implemented. So look at the standards, build all of those practices into your documents, but then also we have to make sure that people are trained at the various level that each component within your organization requires. Here's what that looks like. All of your employees or all of your people within your organization need to have a fundamental understanding of what workplace violence is, what are the warning signs, what do we do about those warning signs if we recognize them, what are the policy considerations, and what are the roles and responsibilities of the individuals, how do we take care of the domestic and intimate partner violence considerations into this program. And then the last one is, how do we respond to potential emergencies like this, such as workplace violence or an active assailant incident? We want everybody to have an awareness of that, because that can really start facilitating prevention. We want to create a culture of awareness that is committed and aware of what prevention looks like. And then, of course, response as well, should things get to that level. But that's what the standards require as part of a fundamental training program. So you might be thinking, well, we hit active assailant training, but we don't have any of the prevention side. Well, let's build that in. Talk about those warning signs. Talk about that progression before things become violent to help round all of that out. But we want to address those issues. As we go up, that's where we get into maybe your frontline leadership. And this is where we want them to have a stronger understanding of the prevention concepts, because if you think about this from an operational standpoint, when managers and supervisors make a report, they're going to be reporting up to the threat management team, but who's reporting to them? It's the people that are on the front lines. So we want them to be able to effectively communicate to the threat management team, but also have a sound understanding of when somebody reports to them exactly how they're expected to handle that information. How do they not exacerbate the issue? What kind of documentation is required of them? How can they de-escalate the issue from becoming potentially worse? How can they effectively support the threat management team when somebody may need to be monitored or assisted with their day-to-day workday behavior? They're right in the middle of this entire process. And from a cultural standpoint, they're kind of that initial leadership perspective, if you will. So the standards basically say we need to give them all of this additional understanding so that we can have an effective component within the collective process that is violence prevention and intervention. I mentioned the threat management team. That's kind of that next level up. And in many ways, I like to consider as the nucleus of this kind of a program. It's a multidisciplinary team where the standards basically say you need to have this team in place. It needs to be multidisciplinary. It needs to be supported by outside experts in the area of threat assessment and management. And this program also needs to have, the threat management team also needs to be trained and also has to have the temperament and the capability to follow through on these issues, because this team is specifically performing the evaluation and managing the incidents that rise up to a level where there is concern for potential violence, or at least they're evaluating whether there is potential concern for violence and how to manage this situation, how to implement what we call intervention strategies should something get to that level. So this team is right in the middle of all of this. So we have all of this information that's coming back to them from managers and supervisors, maybe the frontline employees, maybe HR is part of this as well. But it all ultimately comes back to this threat management team that we want to have trained and that we want to have a strong understanding. The standards say that the threat management team needs to have the most deep training on the psychological and behavioral aspects of workplace violence. There's a lot of information that they need to understand because we're dealing with human behavior, which can be so dynamic. So this threat management team, we want to have it multidisciplinary so that we have multiple inputs, multiple areas of expertise, help spread out that knowledge across the different functions of the organization, as well as some of those liability concerns, but also have that multidisciplinary approach to how to manage issues because of the inputs each is going to have. HR is going to look at the behavioral and the policy side of things. Security might be looking at how to protect the organization and its people. All of these different players come in to include legal or maybe risk management communications. It's a very comprehensive process. So that's a huge aspect of this. And then, of course, as we go to that next level, the top level, you have top management. Top management, executive management, whatever your organization calls it, executive leadership team, That's where we want to have that top-down commitment with this program. And oftentimes that's the case. It's oftentimes the case where executives are behind this program, they're behind this initiative, but the standards kind of identify a few specific things where we want them to have an understanding of workplace violence from the perspective of how to best lead this program from a cultural standpoint, how to know what resources to unlock when those are required, what kind of manpower is going to be required for this program, and how to make sure that this program is trusted in a manner so that it can be effective, because it can be kind of sensitive. So we want the executive leadership to have that fundamental understanding so that they can really support those that are managing this program day to day. And when resources need to be unlocked, there's that understanding there of what all of that is going towards. The other thing I'll say about this is the executive leadership team is probably not going to be involved in this too much. That's probably a pretty natural thing for your organization, just given how a lot of these issues that are similar to workplace violence occur. But one thing you do want to have, and this is a best practice, is you want to have an executive sponsor within your organization. Somebody at the executive level be kind of that champion, if you will, to represent the program at the executive level so that, again, all of these things can occur in a timely and efficient manner. So that's kind of the nuts and bolts of this program. Is we want to have that assessment, we want to have those documents in place, we want to have each of those layers trained, and then the last part of this that I'll share is there are some supporting measures. So physical security, record-keeping capabilities such as software, hiring practices, how does your organization hire, and the background checks and the treatment while individuals are with your organization. How are you facilitating a positive professional culture? How are you facilitating safe terminations? Conflict management is part of this as well. All of these things, while peripheral, also have their part to play. So when you're looking at this, again, go back to those standards I mentioned, because each of these capabilities are going to be having their component or their applicability within this program. And then beyond that, take a look at, are these core aspects in place? So all of those peripheral measures, I'm not hitting on too much, but they absolutely do have their part to play. So if that's something that you're kind of wondering, well, does this have an impact on it? It probably does, because so much of what violence prevention entails is building a safe, professional work environment. So all of those things are peripheral to a program, albeit absolutely applicable. Like I was saying, physical security, hiring practices, safe terminations procedures, that all has its part to play. So if you're wondering if that's adequate for your organization, check out the standards, or you can reach out to us. We'd love to help talk through that with you to make sure that you're covering all of your bases. The last part of this is, again, inside of your program documents, there's a whole suite of practices that come along with implementing this program. That is kind of part two of this. So you build it all out, and then you actually have to follow through on the practices of this. And so that's, again, where the standards can really facilitate some assistance here, as well as identifying what you need to do and how you need to do it. But it's not simply having these documents and then putting out some training. There's a whole series of active involvement that you have with this program, such as the documentation after an investigation, or actually performing an investigation, or performing inspections, supporting this program over the course of time to make sure everything is staying on the up and up. So there's a lot there. There's a lot of information that goes in the program, but that's the core of this is, again, that assessment. You build out your program documents, policy, the governance, the active assailant plan. You get those 3 layers of individuals trained, or 4 layers, if you will, all employees, managers, supervisors, threat management team, and then that executive team. And then from there, it's making sure that all of the various players within those layers are implementing the practices that you have outlined in your documentation. And that's where that management team comes into play to help see this through over the course of time. So a longer video, a lot in there, but I hope you got a lot of value from this. If you have questions, of course, feel free to reach out to us or leave a comment wherever a comment is available to be provided. If you want more information like this, subscribe to our newsletter, The Centerfold. Go to our website. You can see that there. Otherwise, thanks for watching. Till next time.